material world, 8 million of 8,400,000 forms of life are lower than human beings. They are not punishable, for under the laws of material nature, they are automatically evolving. Human beings who are advanced in consciousness are responsible, but not all of them are punishable. Those engaged in advanced pious activities are beyond punishment. Only those who engage in sinful activities are punishable. Therefore, the Vishnu Dutas particularly inquired about who is punishable and why Yamraj has been designated to discriminate between who is punishable and who is not. How is one to be judged? What is the basic principle of authority? These are the questions raised by the Vishnu Dutas. 40. The Yamadutas replied, that which is prescribed in the Vedas constitutes dharma. The religious principles and the opposite of that is irreligion. The Vedas are directly the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayana, and are self-born. This we have heard from Yamaraj. Purport. The servants of Yamaraj replied quite properly. They did not manufacture principles of religion or irreligion. Instead, they explained what they had heard from the authority, Yamaraj. Mahajano yena gata sapanta. One should follow the Mahajan, the authorized person. Yamaraj is one of 12 authorities. Therefore, the servants of Yamaraj, the Yamadutas, replied with perfect clarity when they said, Shushuma, we have heard. The members of modern civilization manufacture defective religious principles through speculative concoction. This is not dharma. They do not know what is dharma and what is adharma. Therefore, as stated in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, dharma projita ketavotra, dharma not supported by the Vedas is rejected from Srimad Bhagavad Dharma. Bhagavad Dharma comprises only that which is given by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Bhagavad Dharma is Sarva Dharman Parityaja Ma Mekam Sharanam Vraja. One must accept the authority of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrender to Him and whatever He says. That is Dharma. Arjuna, for example, thinking that violence was a Dharma, was declining to fight. But Krishna urged him to fight. Arjuna abided by the orders of Krishna and therefore he is actually a dharmi. Because the order of Krishna is dharma. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 15:15, Vedascha sarver aham eva vedya. The real purpose of Veda knowledge is to know me. One who knows Krishna perfectly is liberated. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo veti tattva kyakta deham punarjanma neti mam eti so arjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. One who understands Krishna and abides by his order is a candidate for returning home back to Godhead. It may be concluded that dharma, religion, refers to that which is ordered in the Vedas, and adharma, irreligion, refers to that which is not supported in the Vedas. Dharma is not actually manufactured by Narayana. As stated in the Vedas, Asya Mahato Bhutasya Nishvastitam Idat Yat Rit Vidya Iti. The injunctions of dharma emanate from the breathing of Narayana, the supreme living entity. Narayana exists eternally and breathes eternally, and therefore dharma, the injunctions of Narayana, also exist eternally. Srila Madhvacharya, the original Acharya, for those who belong to the Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, says, Vedanam prathamo bhakta harir eva yato vidhu ato vishnu atmaka veda iti ahur veda vadina. The transcendental words of the Vedas emanate from the mouth of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the Vedic principles should be understood to be Vaishnava principles because Vishnu is the origin of the Vedas. The Vedas contain nothing besides the instructions of Vishnu, and one who follows the Vedic principles is a Vaishnava. The Vaishnava is not a member of a manufactured community of this material world. A Vaishnava is a real knower of the Vedas, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, Vedascha Sarve Aham Eva Vedya. 41. The supreme cause of all causes, Narayana, is situated in his own abode in the spiritual world. But nevertheless, he controls the entire cosmic manifestation according to the three modes of material nature, Sattvaguna, Rajaguna, and Tamaguna. In this way, all living entities are awarded different qualities, different names, such as Brahmana, Kshatriya, and Vaishya, different duties according to the Varnashrama institution, and different forms. Thus, Narayana is the cause of the entire cosmic manifestation. Purport. The Vedas inform us, na tasya karyam karnam cha vidyate, na tat samas chabhyadikas cha drishyate, parasya shaktir vividhe vashuyate, svabhaviki jnana bala kriya cha. Shrutashvara Upanishad 6.8. Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is almighty, omnipotent. He has multifarious energies, and therefore he is able to remain in his abode and without endeavor supervise and manipulate the entire cosmic manifestation through the interaction of the three modes of material nature, Sattvaguna, Rajoguna, and Tamoguna. These interactions create different forms, bodies, activities, and changes, which all occur perfectly. Because the Lord is perfect, everything works as if he were directly supervising and taking part in it. Atheistic man, however, being covered by the three modes of material nature, cannot see Narayan to be the supreme cause behind all activities. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 7.13, Tribhed gunamayer bhaver ibhi sarvam idam jagat mohitam nabhijanati mam ibhya param avyayam. Deluded by the three modes, the whole world does not know me, who am above the modes and inexhaustible. Because unintelligent agnostics are mohita, illusioned by the three modes of material nature, they cannot understand that Narayan, Krishna, is the supreme cause of all activities. As stated in the Brahma Samhita 5.1, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchitananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karnam. Krishna, who is known as Govinda, is the supreme controller. He has an eternal, blissful, spiritual body. He is the origin of all. He has no other origin, for he is the prime cause of all causes. Text 42. The sun, fire, sky, air, demigods, moon, evening, day, night, directions, water, land, and Supersoul himself all witness the activities of the living entity. Purport. The members of some religious sects, especially Christians, do not believe in the reactions of karma. We once had a discussion with a learned Christian professor who argued that although people are generally punished after the witnesses of their misdeeds are examined, where are the witnesses responsible for one suffering the reactions of past karma? To such a person, the answer by the Yamdutas is given here. A conditioned soul thinks that he is working stealthily and that no one can see his sinful activities. But we can understand from the Shastras that there are many witnesses, including the sun, fire, sky, air, moon, demigods, evening, day, night, directions, water, land, and the Supersoul himself, who sits with the individual soul within his heart. Where is the dearth of witnesses? The witnesses and the Supreme Lord both exist, and therefore so many living entities are elevated to the higher planetary systems or degraded to the lower planetary systems, including the hellish planets. There are no discrepancies, for everything is arranged perfectly by the management of the Supreme God. Sabhaviki Jana Bala Kriyacha. The witnesses mentioned in this verse are also mentioned in other Vedic literatures. Aditya Chandra Anilo Nalascha, Dayur Bhumir Apo Hridayam Yamascha, Ahascha Ratis Cha Ubhe Cha Sadhye, Dharmo Pi Janati Narasya Vritam. Text 43. The candidates for punishment are those who are confirmed by these many witnesses to have deviated from their prescribed regulative duties. Everyone engaged in fruitive activities is suitable to be subjected to punishment according to his sinful acts. Text 44. O inhabitants of Vaikuntha, you are sinless, but those within this material world are all karmis, whether acting piously or impiously. Both kinds of action are possible for them because they are contaminated by the three modes of nature and must act accordingly. One who has accepted a material body cannot be inactive, and sinful action is inevitable for one acting under the modes of material nature. Therefore, all the living entities within this material world are punishable. Purport. The difference between human beings and non-human beings is that a human is supposed to act according to the direction of the Vedas. Unfortunately, men manufacture their own ways of acting without reference to the Vedas. Therefore, all of them commit sinful actions and are punishable. Text 45. In proportion to the extent of one's religious or irreligious actions in this life, one must enjoy or suffer the corresponding reactions of his karma in the next. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 14.18, Urdhvam gachanti sattvastha, madhye tishtanti rajasa, jaganya guna vritistha, adho gachanti tamasa. Those who act in the mode of goodness are promoted to higher planetary systems to become demigods. Those who act in an ordinary way and do not commit excessively sinful acts remain within this middle planetary system, and those who perform abominable sinful actions must go down to hellish life. Text 46. O best of the demigods, we can see three different varieties of life which are due to the contamination of the three modes of nature. The living entities are thus known as peaceful, restless, and foolish, as happy, unhappy, or in between, or as religious, irreligious, and semi-religious. We can deduce that in the next life, these three kinds of material nature will similarly act. Purport. The actions and reactions of the three modes of material nature are visible in this life. For example, some people are very happy, some are very distressed, and some are in mixed happiness and distress. This is the result of past association with the modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance. Since these varieties are visible in this life, we may assume that the living entities, according to their association with the different modes of material nature, will be happy, distressed, or between the two in their next lives also. Therefore, the best policy is to disassociate oneself from the three modes of material nature and be always transcendental to their contamination. This is possible only when one fully engages in the devotional service of the Lord. As Krishna confirms in Bhagavad Gita 14.26, Mam cha yoga vicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samityetan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, who does not fall down under any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the spiritual platform. Unless one is fully absorbed in the service of the Lord, one is subject to the contamination of the three modes of material nature and must therefore suffer from distress or mixed happiness and distress. Text 47.
Again. Let's translate it again.
Okay. O best of the demigods,
Right.
we can see three different varieties of life which are due to the contamination of the three modes of nature. The living entities are thus known as peaceful, restless, and foolish, as happy, unhappy, or in between, or as religious, irreligious, and semi-religious. We can deduce that in the next life, these three kinds of material nature will similarly act. Text 47. Just as springtime in the present indicates the nature of springtimes in the past and future, so this life of happiness, distress, or a mixture of both gives evidence concerning the religious and irreligious activities of one's past and future lives. Purport. Our past and future are not very difficult to understand, for time is under the contamination of the three modes of material nature. As soon as spring arrives, the usual exhibition of various types of fruits and flowers automatically becomes manifest. And therefore, we may conclude that spring in the past was adorned with similar fruits and flowers, and will be so adorned in the future also. Our repetition of birth and death is taking place within time, and according to the influence of the modes of nature, we are receiving various types of bodies and being subjected to various conditions. Text 48. The omnipotent Yamaraj is as good as Lord Brahma, for while situated in his own abode or in everyone's heart like the Paramatma, he mentally observes the past activities of a living entity and thus understands how the living entity will act in future lives. Purport. One should not consider Yamaraj an ordinary living being. He is as good as Lord Brahma. He has the complete cooperation of the Supreme Lord, who is situated in everyone's heart. And therefore, by the grace of the Super Soul, he can see the past, present, and future of a living being from within. The word Anumimaspate means that we can decide in consultation with the Super Soul. Anu means following. The actual decisions concerning the next lives of the living entities are made by the Super Soul and they are carried out by Yamaraj. Text 49. As a sleeping person acts according to the body manifested in his dreams and accepts it to be himself, so one identifies with this present body, which he acquired because of his past religious or irreligious actions, and is unable to know his past or future lives. Purport. A man engages in sinful activities because he does not know what he did in his past life to get his present materially conditioned body, which is subjected to the threefold miseries. As stated by Rishabh Dev in Srimad Bhagavatam 5.5.4, Nunam Parmata Purusho Vikarma. A human being who is mad after sense gratification does not hesitate to act sinfully. Yad Indriya Pritaya Apnoti. He performs sinful actions simply for sense gratification. Na sadhu manye. This is not good. Yata atmano yam asan api kleshta asha deha. Because of such sinful actions, one receives another body in which to suffer, as he is suffering in his present body because of his past sinful activities. It should be understood that a person who does not have Vedic knowledge always acts in ignorance of what he has done in the past, of what he is doing at the present, and how he will suffer in the future. He is completely in darkness. Therefore, the Vedic injunction is tamasima, don't remain in darkness. Jyotirgama, try to go to the light. The light or illumination is Vedic knowledge, which one can understand when he is elevated to the mode of goodness or when he transcends the modes of goodness by engaging in devotional service to the spiritual master and the Supreme Lord. This is described in the Shvetashvara Upanishad 6.23. Yasya deve para bhaktir yatha deve tatha guru tasya te kathita hi artha prakashante mahatmana. Unto those great souls who have implicit faith in both the Lord and the spiritual master, all the imports of Vedic knowledge are automatically revealed. The Vedas enjoin tat vijnanartham sadguru eva vigachyate. One must approach a spiritual master who has full knowledge of the Vedas and be faithfully directed by him in order to become a devotee of the Lord. Then the knowledge of the Vedas will be revealed. When the Vedic knowledge is revealed, one need no longer remain in the darkness of material nature. According to his association with the material modes of nature, goodness, passion and ignorance, a living entity gets a particular type of body. The example of one who associates with the mode of goodness is a qualified Brahmana. Such a Brahmana knows past, present and future because he consults the Vedic literature and sees through the eyes of Shastra Chakshu. He can understand what his present life was, why be is in the present body, and how he can obtain liberation from the clutches of Maya and not accept another material body. This is all possible when one is situated in the mode of goodness. Generally, however, the living entities are engrossed in the modes of passion and ignorance. In any case, one receives an inferior or superior body at the discretion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Paramatma, as stated in the previous verse. Mana Sheva Pure Deva Purva Rupam Vipasyati Anumamasyate Purvam Manasa Bhagavan Aja. Everything depends on Bhagavan or Aja, the unborn. Why doesn't one please Bhagavan to receive a better body? The answer is Agnas Tamasa, because of gross ignorance. One who is in complete darkness cannot know what his past life was or what his next life will be. He is simply entrusted in his present body. Even though he has a human body, a person in the mode of ignorance and entrusted only in his present body is like an animal. For an animal, being covered by ignorance, thinks that the ultimate goal of life and happiness is to eat as much as possible. A human being must be educated to understand his past life and how he can endeavor for a better life in the future. There is even a book called Bhrigu Samhita which reveals information about one's past, present and future lives according to astrological calculations. Somehow or other, one must be enlightened about his past, present and future. One who is entrusted only in his present body and who tries to enjoy his senses to the fullest extent is understood to be engrossed in the mode of ignorance. His future is very, very dark. Indeed, the future is always dark for one who is grossly covered by ignorance. Especially in this age, human society is covered by the mode of ignorance, and therefore everyone thinks his present body to be everything, without consideration of the past or future. Text 50. Above the five senses of perception, the five working senses, and the five objects of the senses is the mind, which is the 16th element. Above the mind is the 17th element, the soul, the living being himself, who in cooperation with the other 16 enjoys the material world alone. The living being enjoys three kinds of situations, namely happy, distressful, and mixed. Purport. Everyone engages in work with his hands, legs, and other senses just to achieve a certain goal according to his concocted ideas. One tries to enjoy the five sense objects, namely form, sound, taste, aroma, and touch, not knowing the actual goal of life, which is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. Because of disobeying the Supreme Lord, one is put into material conditions and he then tries to improve his situation in a concocted way, not desiring to follow the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nevertheless, the Supreme Lord is so kind that he comes himself to instruct the bewildered living entity how to act obediently and then gradually return home back to Godhead, where he can attain an eternal, peaceful life of bliss and knowledge. The living entity has a body, which is a very complicated combination of the material elements, and with this body, he struggles alone as indicated in this verse by the words ekastu. For example, if one is struggling in the ocean, he must swim through it alone. Although many other men and aquatics are swimming in the ocean, he must take care of himself because no one else will help him. Therefore, this verse indicates that the 17th item, the soul, must work alone. Although he tries to create society, friendship, and love, no one will be able to help him but Krishna, the Supreme Lord. Therefore, his only concern should be how to satisfy Krishna. That is also what Krishna wants. Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. People related by material conditions try to be united, but although they strive for unity among men and nations, all their attempts are futile. Everyone must struggle alone for existence with the many elements of nature. Therefore, one's only hope, as Krishna advises, is to surrender to him. For he can help one become free from the ocean of nescience. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore prayed, Ai Nandatanuja Kinkaram Patitam Mam Vishame Bhavagado Kripaya Tava Pada Pankaja Stitha Dhuli Sudisham Vichintaya. O Krishna, beloved son of Nand Maharaj, I am your eternal servant. But somehow or other, I have fallen into this ocean of nescience, and although I am struggling very hard, there is no way I can save myself. If you kindly pick me up and fix me as one of the particles of dust at your lotus feet, that will save me. In a similar way, Bhakti Vinod Thakur sang, Anand Karame Phale Padi Bhavarana Jale Tari Bare Na Dekhi Upay. My dear Lord, I cannot remember when I somehow or other fell into this ocean of nescience, and now I can find no way to rescue myself. We should remember that everyone is responsible for his own life. If an individual becomes a pure devotee of Krishna, he is then delivered from the ocean of nescience. Text 51. The subtle body is endowed with 16 parts. The 5 knowledge-acquiring senses, the 5 working senses, the 5 objects of sense, gratification, and the mind. This subtle body is an effect of the 3 modes of material nature. It is composed of insurmountably strong desires, and therefore it causes a living entity to transmigrate from one body to another in human life, animal life, and life as a demigod. When the living entity gets the body of a demigod, he is certainly very jubilant. When he gets a human body, he is always in lamentation. And when he gets the body of an animal, he is always afraid. In all conditions, however, he is actually miserable. His miserable condition is called samshriti, or transmigration in material life. Purport. The sum and substance of material conditioned life is explained in this verse. The living entity, the 17th element, is struggling alone, life after life. This struggle is called samsriti, or material conditional life. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the force of material nature is insurmountably strong. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that the force of material nature is insurmountably strong. Devi hi isha guna maya, mama maya duratara. Material nature harasses the living entity in different bodies. But if the living entity surrenders to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he becomes free from this entanglement, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Mam eva ye prapadyante mayam itam tarantite. Thus, his life becomes successful. Text 52. The foolish embodied living entity, inept at controlling his senses and mind, is forced to act according to the influence of the modes of material nature against his desires. He is like a silkworm that uses its own saliva to create a cocoon and then becomes trapped in it, with no possibility of getting out. The living entity traps himself in a network of his own fruitive activities and then can find no way to release himself. Thus, he is always bewildered and repeatedly he dies. Purport. As explained, or as already explained, the influence of the modes of nature is very strong. The living entity entangled in different types of fruitive activity is like a silkworm trapped in a cocoon. Getting free is very difficult unless he is held by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Text 53. Not a single living entity can remain unengaged even for a moment. One must act by his natural tendency according to the three modes of material nature. Because this natural tendency forcibly makes him work in a particular way. Purport. The swabhavika or one's natural tendency is the most important factor in action. One's natural tendency is to serve because a living entity is an eternal servant of God. The living entity wants to serve, but because of his forgetfulness of his relationship with the Supreme Lord, he serves under the modes of material nature and manufactures various modes of services such as socialism, humanitarianism, and altruism. However, one should be enlightened in the tenets of Bhagavad Gita and accept the instructions of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that one give up all natural tendencies for material service under different names and take to the service of the Lord. One's original natural tendency is to act in Krishna consciousness because one's real nature is spiritual. The duty of a human being is to understand that since he is essentially spirit, he must abide by the spiritual tendency and not be carried away by material tendency. Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur has therefore sung Miche Maya Vase Yasha Bese Kacha Ababudu Bhai. My dear brothers, you are being carried away by the waves of material energy and are suffering in many miserable conditions. Sometimes you are drowning in the waves of material nature, and sometimes you are tossed like a swimmer struggling in the ocean. As confirmed by Bhakti Vinod Thakur, this tendency to be battered by the waves of Maya can be changed to one's original natural tendency, which is spiritual, when the living entity comes to understand that he is eternally Krishna Das, a servant of God, Krishna. Jiva Krishna Das ei Vishwas, karle ta ara dukhe nai. If instead of serving Maya under different names, one turns his service attitude towards the Supreme Lord, he is then safe and there is no more difficulty. If one returns to his original natural tendency in the human form of life by understanding the perfect knowledge given by Krishna himself in the Vedic literature, one's life is successful. Text 54. The fruitive activities a living entity performs, whether pious or impious, are the unseen cause for the fulfillment of his desires. This unseen cause is the root for the living entity's different bodies. Because of his intense desire, the living entity takes birth in a particular family and receives a body which is either like that of his mother or like that of his father. The gross and subtle bodies are created according to his desire. Purport. The gross body is a product of the subtle body. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Yam yam yapi swaran bhavan tajanti ante kalevaram tam tam eviti kaunteya sada tat bhava bhavita. Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, that state he will attain without fail. The atmosphere of the subtle body at the time of death is created by the activities of the gross body. Thus the gross body acts during one's lifetime and the subtle body acts at the time of death. The subtle body, which is called linga, the body of desire, is the background for the development of a particular type of gross body, which is either like that of one's mother or like that of one's father. According to the Rig Veda, if at the time of sex the secretions of the mother are more profuse than those of the father, the child will receive a female body. And if the secretions of the father are more profuse than those of the mother, the child will receive a male body. These are the subtle laws of nature which act according to the desire of the living entity. If a human being is taught to change his subtle body by developing a consciousness of Krishna at the time of death, the subtle body will create a gross body in which he will be a devotee of Krishna. Or if he is still more perfect, he will not take another material body, but will immediately get a spiritual body and thus return home back to Godhead. This is the process of the transmigration of the soul. Therefore, instead of trying to unite human society through pacts for sense gratification that can never be achieved, it is clearly desirable to teach people how to become Krishna conscious and return home back to Godhead. This is true now and indeed at any time. Text 55. Since the living entity is associated with material nature, he is in an awkward position. But if in the human form of life he is taught how to associate with the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his devotees, this position can be overcome. Purport. The word Prakriti means material nature, and Purusha may also refer to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If one wants to continue his association with Prakriti, the female energy of Krishna, and be separated from Krishna by the illusion that he is able to enjoy Prakriti, he must continue in this conditioned life. If he changes his consciousness, however, and associates with the Supreme Original Person, Purusham Shashvatam, or with his associates, he can get out of the entanglement of the material nature. As confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Jarma Karma Chame Divyam Evam Yogeti Tatukaha. One must simply understand the Supreme Person, Krishna, in terms of his form, name, activities, and pastimes. This will keep one always in the association of Krishna. Tyatta Devam Punarjanma Neti Mam Eti So Arjuna. Thus, after giving up his gross material body, one accepts not another gross body, but a spiritual body, in which to return home back to Godhead. Thus, one ends the tribulation caused by his association with the material energy. In summary, the living entity is an eternal servant of God, but he comes to the material world and is bound by material conditions because of his desire to lord it over matter. Liberation means giving up this false consciousness and reviving one's original service to the Lord. This return to one's original life is called mukti, as confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam. Mukti sita vanyatha rupam sarupena vyavasthiti. Text 56 and 57. In the beginning of this Brahmana named Ajamil studied all the Vedic literatures. In the beginning, this Brahmana named Ajamil studied all the Vedic literatures. He was a reservoir of good character, good conduct, and good qualities. Firmly established in executing all the Vedic injunctions, he was very mild and gentle, and he kept his mind and senses under control. Furthermore, he was always truthful, he knew how to chant the Vedic mantras, and he was also very pure. Ajamil was very respectful to his spiritual master, the fire god, guests, and the elderly members of his household. Indeed, he was free from false prestige. He was upright, benevolent to all living entities, and well behaved. He would never speak nonsense or envy anyone. Okay. The order carriers of Yamaraj, the Yamadutas, are explaining the factual position of piety and impiety, and how a living entity is entangled in this material world. Describing the history of Ajamil's life, the Yamadutas relate that in the beginning he was a learned scholar of the Vedic literature. He was well behaved, neat and clean, and very kind to everyone. In fact, he had all good qualities. In other words, he was like a perfect Brahmana. A Brahmana is expected to be perfectly pious, to follow all regulative principles, and to have all good qualities. The symptoms of piety are explained in these verses. Sri Vigraha, Sri Viragava Acharya comments that Dhrita Vrata means Dhritam Vratam Sri Sangha Rahiyatmaka Brahmacharya Rupam. In other words, Ajamil followed the rules and regulations of celibacy as a perfect brahmachari and was very soft-hearted, truthful, clean and pure. How he fell down in spite of all these qualities and thus came to be threatened with punishment by Yamraj will be described in the following verses. Text 58 to 60. Once this Brahmana Ajamil followed the order of his father, went to the forest to collect fruit, flowers, and two kinds of grass called Samit and Kusha. On the way home, he came upon a Shudra, a very lusty, fourth-class man who was shamelessly embracing and kissing a prostitute. The Shudra was smiling, singing, and enjoying as if it were proper behavior. Both the Shudra and the prostitute were drunk. The prostitute's eyes were rolling in intoxication, and her dress had become loose. Such was the condition in which Ajamil saw them. Purport. While traveling along the public way, Ajamil came upon a fourth-class man and a prostitute who are vividly described here. Drunkenness was sometimes manifest even in bygone ages, although not very frequently. In this age of Kali, however, such sin is to be seen everywhere, for people all over the world have become shameless. Long ago, when he saw the scene of the drunken Shudra and the prostitute, Ajamil, who was a perfect brahmachari, was affected. Nowadays, such sin is visible in so many places, and we must consider the position of a brahmachari student who sees such behavior. For such a brahmachari to remain steady is very difficult unless he is extremely strong in following the regular principles. Nevertheless, if one takes to Krishna consciousness very seriously, he can withstand the provocation created by sin. In our Krishna conscious movement, we prohibit illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, and gambling. In Kali Yuga, a drunk, half-naked woman embracing a drunk man is a very common sight, especially in the Western countries, and restraining oneself after seeing such things is very difficult. Nevertheless, if by the grace of Krishna, one adheres to the regulative principles and chants the Hare Krishna mantra, Krishna will certainly protect him. Indeed, Krishna says that his devotee is never vanquished. Kanteya pratijanihi name bhaktya pranishyati. Therefore, all the disciples practicing Krishna consciousness should obediently follow the regulative principles and remain fixed in chanting the holy name of the Lord. Then there need be no fear. Otherwise, one's position is very dangerous, especially in this Kali Yuga. Text 61. The Shudra, his arm decorated with turmeric powder, was embracing the prostitute. When Ajamil saw her, the dormant lusty desires in his heart awakened, and in illusion he fell under their control. Purport. It is said that if one's body is smeared with turmeric, it attracts the lusty desires of the opposite sex. The word kama liptena indicates that the Shudra was decorated with turmeric smeared on his body. Text 62. As far as possible, he patiently tried to remember the instructions of the Shastra, not even to see a woman. With the help of this knowledge and his intellect, he tried to control his lusty desires, but because of the force of Cupid within his heart, he failed to control his mind. Purpose. Unless one is very strong in knowledge, patience, and proper bodily, mental, and intellectual behavior, controlling one's lusty desires is extremely difficult. Thus, after seeing a man embracing a young woman and practically doing everything required for sex life, even a fully qualified Brahmana, as described above, could not control his lusty desires and restrain himself from pursuing them. Because of the force of materialistic life, to maintain self-control is extremely difficult, unless one is specifically under the protection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through devotional service. Text 63. In the same way that the sun and moon are eclipsed by a low planet, the Brahmana lost all his good sense. Taking advantage of this situation, he always thought of the prostitute, and within a short time he took her as a servant in his house and abandoned all the regulatory principles of a Brahmana. Okay. By speaking this verse, Sukadeva Goswami wants to impress upon the mind of the reader that Ajamil's exalted position as a Brahmana was vanquished by his association with the prostitute. So much so that he forgot all his brahminical activities. Nevertheless, at the end of his life, by chanting the 4 syllables of the name Narayan, he was saved from the gravest danger of falling down. Swalpam api asya dharmasya prayato mahato bhaya. Even a little devotional service can save one from the greatest danger. Devotional service, which begins from chanting of the holy name of the Lord, is so powerful that even if one falls down from the exalted position of a Brahmana through sexual indulgence, he can be saved from all calamities if he somehow or other chants the holy name of the Lord. This is the extraordinary power of the Lord's holy name. Therefore, in Bhagavad Gita, it is advised that one not forget the chanting of the holy name even for a moment. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantaschat hridavrata. There are so many dangers in this material world that one may fall down from an exalted position at any time. Yet, if one keeps himself always pure and steady by chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, he will be safe without a doubt. Text 64. Thus Ajamil began spending whatever money he had inherited from his father to satisfy the prostitute with various material presentations so that she would remain pleased with him. He gave up all his Brahminical activities to satisfy the prostitute. Purport. There are many instances throughout the world in which even a purified person, being attracted by a prostitute, spends all the money he has inherited. Prostitute hunting is so abominable that the desire for sex with a prostitute can ruin one's character, destroy one's exalted position, and plunder all one's money. Therefore, illicit sex is strictly prohibited. One should be satisfied with his married wife, or even a slight deviation will create havoc. A Krishna-conscious Grihastha should always remember this. He should always be satisfied with one wife and be peaceful simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. Otherwise, at any moment, he may fall down from his good position, as is exemplified in the case of Ajamil. Text 65. Because his intelligence was pierced by the lustful glance of the prostitute, the victimized Brahmana Ajamil engaged in sinful acts in her association. He even gave up this company of his very beautiful young wife, who came from a very respectable Brahmana family. Purport. Customarily, everyone is eligible to inherit his father's property, and Ajamil also inherited the money of his father. But what did he do with the money? Instead of engaging the money in the service of Krishna, he engaged it in the service of a prostitute. Therefore, he was condemned and was punishable by Yamraj. How did this happen? He was victimized by the dangerous, lustful glance of a prostitute. Text 66. Although born of a Brahmana family, this rascal, bereft of intelligence, because of the prostitute's association, earned money somehow or other, regardless of whether properly or improperly, and used it to maintain the prostitute's son and sons and daughters. Text 67. This Brahmana irresponsibly spent his long lifetime transgressing all the rules and regulations of the holy dedicated to forbidden activities. Purpose. Food preparations by an unclean, sinful man or woman, especially a prostitute, is extremely infectious. Jamil ate such food and therefore he was subject to be punished by Yamaraj. Text 68. This man, Ajamil, did not undergo atonement. Therefore, because of his sinful life, we must take him into the presence of Yamaraj for punishment. There, according to the extent of his sinful acts, he will be punished and thus purified. Purport. The Vishnu Dutas had forbidden the Yam Dutas to take Ajamil to Yamaraj, and therefore the Yam Dutas explained that taking such a man to Yamaraj was appropriate. Since Ajamil had not undergone atonement for his sinful acts, he was to be taken to Yamaraj to be purified. When a man commits murder, he becomes sinful, and therefore he also must be killed. Otherwise, after death, he must suffer many sinful reactions. Similarly, punishment by Yamaraj is a process of purification for the most abominable sinful persons. Therefore, the Yamadutas requested the Vishnu Dutas not to obstruct their taking Ajamil to Yamaraj. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 6th canto, 1st chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled The History of the Life of Ajamil.
Music.
Chapter 2. Text 1. Sukhdev Goswami said, My dear king, the servants of Lord Vishnu are always very expert in logic and arguments. After hearing the statements of the Yamadutas, they replied as follows. Text 2. The Vishnu Dutas said, Alas, how painful it is that irreligion is being introduced into an assembly where religion should be maintained. Indeed, those in charge of maintaining the religious principles are needlessly punishing a sinless, unpunishable person. Purport. The Vishnu Dutas accused the Yam Dutas of violating the religious principles by attempting to drag Ajamil to Yamaraj for punishment. Yamaraj is the officer appointed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to judge religious and irreligious principles and to punish people who are irreligious. However, if completely sinless people are punished, the entire assembly of Yamaraj is contaminated. This principle applies not only in the assembly of Yamaraj, but throughout human society also. In human society, properly maintaining religious principles is the duty of the king's court or the government. Unfortunately, in this Yuga, Kali Yuga, the religious principles are tampered with, and the government cannot properly judge who is to be punished and who is not. It is said that in the Kali Yuga, if one cannot spend money in court, one cannot get justice. Indeed, in courts of justice, it is often found that magistrates are tried for favorable judgment. Sometimes religious men who preach the Krishna conscious movement for the benefit of the entire populace are arrested and harassed by the police and courts. The Vishnu Dutas, who are Vaishnavas, lamented for these very regrettable acts. Because of their spiritual compassion for all the fallen souls, Vaishnavas go out to preach according to the standard method of all religious principles, but unfortunately, because of the influence of Kali Yuga, Vaishnavas who have dedicated their lives to preaching the glories of the Lord are sometimes harassed and punished by the courts on false charges of disturbing the peace. Text 3. A king or governmental official should be so well qualified that he acts as a father, maintainer, and protector of the citizens because of affection and love. He should give the citizens good advice and instructions according to the standard scriptures and should be equal to everyone. Yamraj does this, for he is the supreme master of justice, and so do those who follow in his footsteps. However, if such persons become polluted and exhibit partiality by punishing an innocent, blameless person, Where do the citizens go to take shelter for their maintenance and security? Purport. The king, or in the modern times the government, should act as the guardian of the citizens by teaching them the proper goal of life. The human form of life is especially meant for realization of oneself and one's relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because this cannot be realized in animal life. The duty of the government, therefore, is to take charge of training all the citizens in such a way that by gradual process they will be elevated to the spiritual platform and will realize the self and his relationship with God. This principle was followed by kings like Maharaj Yudhishthir, Maharaj Parikshit, Lord Ramchandra, Maharaj Amrish, and Prahlad Maharaj. The leaders of the government must be very honest and religious, because otherwise all the affairs of the state will suffer. Unfortunately, in the name of democracy, rogues and thieves are electing other rogues and thieves to the most important posts in the government. Recently, this has been proven in America, where the president had to be condemned and dragged down from his post by the citizens. This is only one case, but there are many others. Because of the importance of the Krishna conscious movement, people should be Krishna conscious and should not vote for anyone who is not Krishna conscious. Then there will be actual peace and prosperity in the state. When a Vaishnava sees mismanagement in the government, he feels great compassion in his heart and tries his best to purify the situation by spreading the Hare Krishna movement.
Next one. Next topic.
कृपा करी वृंदावन वासी
जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शतशती भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्री प्रभुपाद से जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य विष्णुपाद गोरक्षदास जी महाराज की जय, श्री सच्चिदानंद भक्तिविनोद ठाकुर की जय, श्री गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय, श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद सद्गुरु गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय, राधा ललिता विशाखा राज महाराज की जय, कृष्ण बलराम की जय, जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रा सुदर्शन जय, श्री गौर निताय भगवान की जय, प्रहलाद नरसिंह देव जय, गुरु नरसिंह देव की जय, लक्ष्मी नरसिंह देव की जय, निताय गौर हरि प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। सभी भक्तों को जय जयकार। हरे कृष्ण। वृंदा देवी तुलसी महारानी की जय। हरे कृष्ण हरे कृष्ण।